All right. So let's get started. So, hey, everybody. Welcome to the BlockSpaces live show. My name is Shahan Khoshafian, and I'll be the moderator and host for today. And we have a great episode with some really amazing guests. And today's topic is going to be around digital ID and privacy in the time of COVID-19. So, before we get started, why don't we just go around the room and make just a brief introduction about yourself? So, Gabe, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Thanks, Shahan. I'm Gabe Higgins. I'm the co-founder and COO of BlockSpaces, blockchain innovation studio here in Tampa, Florida.
Awesome. Sam?
I'm Samuel Arms. I'm president of the Florida Blockchain Business Association, and I am the Blockchain and Legislative Affairs Director for Seminole County Tax Collector Joel Greenberg.
Awesome. Chuck?
I'm Chuck Dyer. I'm the Director of Product Development for DXC Technology based here in Tampa, Florida.
Great. And Dana, do you want to just do a quick intro as well?
Hi guys, I'm Dana. I do some digital content for BlockSpaces.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Gabe, why don't we start with a question to you? I know you've been tracking a lot of this digital ID, the COVID-19 stuff really closely. So we're seeing a lot of headlines, right, about these digital certificates being used to show that you have immunity for COVID-19, and these different certificates are going to be attached to your ID. And Bill Gates had a statement recently that said, digital certificates will be used to identify who received the upcoming COVID-19 vaccine. And these certificates will also be used to identify who can conduct business or not. Eventually, we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. So this has caused a lot of controversy online, right, around Bill Gates. So in your opinion, Gabe, what is digital ID, and what are some of the biggest challenges in addressing these kind of solutions?
Yeah, so digital ID is basically a digital identifier that enables you to be identified in a digital environment. So instead of like your driver's license that you physically have and carry around with you, a digital identifier would identify who you are, or your device. This works for devices as well, on the internet and how you interact on the internet. So what Bill Gates is talking about is a digital identifier using both credentials for your person and for devices, and they can track what's going on between those, and you be able to verify credentials that are issued to you, to your digital identity. But there's a variety of different kinds of digital identifiers that you can have, and this is what's interesting to us here, is that being a blockchain innovation studio, we focus on distributed identifiers that are not maintained by a central authority, um, that are maintained by the person themselves. The holder of those private keys, as it were, are the ones that can control what is seen, who sees it, when they see it, and how much they can see it. So it puts the user at the focus of that digital identifier and the control and maintaining that digital ID. Whereas some of the systems that are being talked about for this particular case, I know not only Bill Gates is talking about it, but also Google and Apple now are teaming up
Right.
to come up with an application that actually lives on their OSs, their operating systems, that of course every iPhone and every Android device uses, to enable these kinds of swaps of digital identifiers if you're in the vicinity of somebody through Bluetooth. So, and of course those would be more centrally maintained by those big tech companies. So it's really about privacy is what it gets down to. Who has control of those identifiers, how they're operated with, who has visibility to what's being transacted with those.
Hmm. Yeah, those are some really good points there. And you touched on a lot of the private sector, and segueing kind of to the public sector. Sam, I want to talk to you about, some of the stuff Gabe mentioned was around privacy and around the data and one single entity owning and be able to track all of that personal data. And this is even more important when you're talking about, health data, people's health data. So you were recently involved in a blockchain-based digital ID project in Seminole County. How does blockchain help solve some, if not all, of these like privacy concerns we've been mentioning?
Well, I know specifically like for our application, right, that was one of the most complicated issues that we were kind of working with, right? Because as government, even talking with some of the local law enforcement agencies, there's always a want to view the user's data, right? For a variety of reasons, which a lot of these private companies have the same incentive, right? For tracking or whatever kind of use. But we decided, when we went with a blockchain, that we did want to kind of enhance the user experience by creating a lot of privacy for them. I mean, so I know one function that we have in the app, or our proof of concept currently, is that if someone were to request a credential from you, the user, still have the right to deny that, right? So say you had some kind of credential that, for whatever reason, proved that you had antibodies or not, you still would have the ability to whether you want to share that information or not. So we like the idea of privacy, and it's there. That's always a struggle, right? I mean, it's interesting seeing what Apple and Microsoft and Google are kind of doing in this direction, but you can definitely see how their solution can be taken out of hand in a lot of ways. I was just reading today how they would use Bluetooth, and you would automatically be notified if you came into contact with someone within a certain distance who tested positive for the virus, right? Okay, so that looks good because we're talking about the virus, but if you think of literally any other scenario, that almost sounds horrifying, right? And then, of course, who owns that data, right? Which database is it stored on? So I think with a blockchain, although it doesn't necessarily have to be used like this, because you can obviously have an open ledger where everybody can see the data, and it depends on what data you put on the blockchain. In our case, our hope would be we would use the blockchain specifically to conceal your identity as much as possible. So your data is stored on your device and you have control over that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that thanks for giving that insight on the public sector. And then again, to transition to Chuck, you're working with a lot of different major enterprise company, working with a lot of these major large vendors. So when you think about these large vendors, Gabe talked a little bit about people that might be addressing these solutions, and Sam talked a little bit about the public sector. But can you give us some insight on, some of the projects that are happening around digital ID with the large vendors like DXC, Microsoft, IBM? And then what are some challenges that you think lie with more of, the smaller startup community versus the enterprise? And is there room for collaboration?
Sure, thanks. Well, of course, all the major players right now are currently doing work and offering solutions in the digital identity space. Most of them are really focused at that level on the enterprise. So for example, DXC is very highly focused on digital transformation in the enterprise, and they built an entire practice around digital identity. They offer a variety of solutions. Some focus on provisioning, access governance, authentication, and PKI to protect enterprises. Whereas Microsoft, for example, is taking a more open source approach by collaborating with members of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the W3C group, and the wider identity community. And they're really actively trying to develop an open source DID implementation that runs on top of existing public chains as kind of like a public layer 2 network designed for world scale. IBM was actually one of the early players in the blockchain space for enterprise, and they've recently released their alpha version of their digital ID offering called IBM Verify Credentials. Now, their approach is obviously to push the identity more to the edges of the network and make it possible for organizations to issue their credentials directly to individuals. And the nice thing about that is it allows the individuals then can hold those credentials and present those credentials to other organizations that they choose to through express consent. As it relates to the startup community, I think there are a lot of great disruptive innovations taking place right now. The biggest challenge, I think, is currently with the pandemic is really hit the community hard. And I know many startups and small businesses have either completely disappeared or shut down indefinitely. And it's extremely discouraging because a lot of that technology could potentially be lost and never recovered. I feel now is really the time when enterprises should be reaching out to their tech startups and their local communities and look to be able to collaborate on some of these innovations. There's so many new use cases that have come to light recently because of the pandemic that these small businesses and startups are able to develop quickly and bring new solutions to market. And in turn, the enterprises can really, by collaborating with them, can bring value to their customer by being able to use these solutions. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to exist for collaboration to help keep these businesses afloat during this time, as well as provide larger enterprises the ability to be creative and bring solutions to their customers immediately.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point where these enterprise, because it helps on a variety of different fronts, because the enterprises might not have the teams and the competencies and the resources set up right, and the structure to set up to come out with these innovative solutions. At the same time, startups can help there, and as well as this is a time that's really tough for startups. So it's a time that you can collaborate and actually get to these different solutions. So I think there is a lot of room for this enterprise and startup collaboration to solve these new pressing problems that didn't exist before. So any other final thoughts before we wrap up the show from anybody? Anybody else have any other final thoughts? Otherwise, I wanted to talk about the next subject for next week. Thank everyone for joining. And then for those of you who are listening, in the comment section, please put a topic that you would like to discuss around blockchain and around these different systems and innovations that can be created in this time, or really any other subject that you're interested in. We want to take that into account the next topic we choose. But before I close this out, any other final thoughts from anybody on the panel?
I guess I would just add that I think during these times, one of the things that tends to be put on the back burner is spend as it relates to innovation. I think it's really important that companies are looking to continue their innovation efforts today, especially in light of all the new type of circumstances that businesses are under, whether they're large companies, mid-market companies, small businesses. They all have new ways that they're trying to work now. And there have been so many use cases that have come to light that really need some attention and some quick turnaround on to fix that problem. And I think by allowing innovation to continue within companies and making sure that you're aware of the innovation that's going on in your local communities, you can take advantage of that very quickly.
Yeah, and I would add to that we're seeing companies' interest in really revolutionizing what they've been doing, right? Now is the time to completely revamp your system and processes and improve where you maybe couldn't before because you're caught up in the day-to-day with everything kind of either completely on pause or really scaled back as far as operations. Now would be a really good time to tweak the necessary components of your processes and really streamline some of those that you've seen where there's cracks.
Ditto for government.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week. And the topic for next week will be around the food supply chain. We'll talk about track and trace, a variety of other things. So that's going to be exciting. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Gabe, Sam, Chuck, and Dana for setting this all up.
Thanks, Shahan.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.